as a discipline. 2. Trade-offs. 3. Macro, micro, and mesoeconomics. 4. Different schools of thought. Introduction. Food, shelter, clothes, and so on are the basic necessities for humans. In today's world, the basic necessities also include electricity, transport, education, phones, and so on. We rely on nature to provide the resources to satisfy our daily needs. Initially, we relied on nature and produced items for daily consumption, as well as the immediate future. In the usual course of time, we advanced the techniques and methods of manufacturing to produce far more than what the manufacturers could consume. Through the barter system, surplus goods and services, education, health, transport, etc., were exchanged for other goods and services in demand. Money did not exist as a mode of payment yet, and the barter system, also known as the exchange system, served a limited purpose in a simple economy. As manufacturing expanded in volume, value, and complexity, the barter system lost its historical relevance almost entirely. Currently, barter is used only when money loses its value when the prices rise astronomically. The barter system enjoys restricted use in international trade when countries exchange goods and services. It is known as counter trade. Fact check. Goods and services may either be exchanged for other goods and services, barter, as it used to happen, as a practice in primitive economies, or they are exchanged for money, which is the practice adopted by contemporary economies in the world. Barter system have many limitations. As said by Yuval Noah Harari, there is a shoemaker who has shoes to sell and there is an apple seller. What happens if the shoemaker doesn't like apples and really wants a lawyer for divorce? True, the farmer could look for a lawyer who likes apples and set up a three-way deal. But what if the lawyer is full up on apples but really needs a haircut? The social activity where people come together to produce, stock, distribute, trade, and facilitate consumption of goods and services is known as economy. This entire activity, that is, for buying and selling, is meant for the market. 1. 822. The quantitative difference in the production of goods and services between 2 points of time is known as the economic growth. The negative difference is called degrowth. On the other hand, economic development defines economic growth with human development in terms of education, health, equity, and so on. Economic policy, also known as a government or non-government policy, aims at generating growth and development, among other aspirations. Government economic policy constitutes of many subsets, like fiscal policy, monetary policy, industrial policy, agricultural policy, foreign trade policy, and so on. Economics as a discipline. Economists studies economic activity as an academic discipline and also attempts to make it viable in the face of scarcities. The term economics comes from two Greek words, oikos meaning family, household, or estate, and nomos meaning norm or law. The origin of the term itself is revealing. The universally acknowledged reality, be it household or village or a nation-state, is that people have multiple needs and the available resources to meet these needs are scarce. The norm at the micro level, household, holds true for the macro economy as well, even at the national or global levels, i.e., scarcity of resource. The study of rational management of limited resources is the essence of economics. Rationality means choosing the right means for the given end. Economic rationality, which started with the study of production, distribution, and consumption, has come to include equity and sustainability as well since the last century. One needs to comprehend economics as a discipline that is based on scarcity. Take land, for example, it is one of the scarce resources. The global population in India is 15%, but global land is only 2.4%. Hence, there is immense stress on land. The uses of land are manifold. It is needed for agriculture, food and non-food, manufacturing, forestry, residential purposes, and so on. Economics aims to find optimal ways of prioritizing the use of such limited resources. The act that addresses the land claims of farmers, industry, and other sections in a balanced manner is the Land Acquisition and Rehabilitation and Resettlement Act, 2013. In the same manner, water is also scarce and is depleting even more so. There are multiple demands for agricultural, industrial, domestic, and other sectors. How to divide the existing amount of water among all sectors is a public policy challenge that is mentioned in the Draft National Water Policy, NWP, 2012. The purpose of the Food Security Law is the same. Government is committed to it being a welfare state, but there are multiple operational challenges relating to the food quantity that can be given at discounted prices, the methods of distribution, and whether it be through government-regulated outlets, by government departments, or by public-private partnerships, PPP. The scope of two 823. Sriram has. Food subsidy is also an important matter, as it stresses on the finances of the government and influences the market prices. As a field of study, economics draws from experience, within the country and from other countries, and advises on such dilemmas about public policy. Economists focused on wealth initially, that is, initially, creation of wealth mattered at any cost. To be sensitive to the human dimension did not interest economists. Snippets. The need for economics as a branch of social science is relevant to strike a balance between the needs and resources. Kuznets curve. Opinion was divided about the human misery that economic growth created. Concerns were raised about children being made to work overtime and receive inadequate payment for their work, the inhumane conditions of work, the squalor, and so on. Simultaneously, some justified it on grounds of comparative advantage it gave in trade, as it decreased the cost of production. Welfare became the new concern of the discipline when there was relative prosperity, and the government collected adequate taxes, and democratic dissent grew. In the form of an inverted U, Kuznets' curve shows the initial increase in inequality, and how inequality decreases with economic growth in industrial democracies. Trade-offs. New Delhi. From the perspective of economics, there are trade-offs in the study of government policies, because paucity of resources is the basic assumption of the discipline. Wherein there is a compromise on one goal to achieve an additional goal, that is where trade-offs come into practice. Trade-offs involve making choices in policies. It is a way of balancing among desirable goals. Multiple examples can be given. The lives versus livelihoods debate during the COVID-19 pandemic, when lockdowns were necessary to save lives, but it also meant that jobs would be lost and economy would crash. A quintessential example. Therefore, public policy was modified to minimize the loss of economic growth, livelihoods, and lives. Reserve Bank of India focuses on price stability, which is the overriding objective of its monetary policy, even as some growth is reduced in the process, as it involves, at times, inflation in interest rates. Even as inflation is a serious concern, the macroeconomic condition in mid-2021 demands that growth be addressed first. Thus, to some extent, price stability is traded off, compromised, for economic growth in the face of recession. 3. 823. Sriram's Las. In a similar manner, government wants to provide subsidies to the poor and destitute. It may mean more loans, and therefore some fiscal excess. But this addresses poverty, and hence political stability is ensued. Hence, fiscal prudence might be traded off, to some extent, in pursuit of welfare. Snippets. Public investment is critical, and so is the need to limit government loans. Striking the right balance between the two involves a trade-off. Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management, FRBM, Act laid down 3% of annual central government loans, where infrastructure investment is eased even as government finances are partly strained. Compensation for the land owners is increased to balance the interests of the farmers and industrialists in the land acquisition law. Investment may abate the process, but social justice gets addressed. Land is to be attained for manufacturing, and the consent of the land owner may be conditionally dispensed within public interest, i.e., the trade-off. Opportunity costs. Opportunity costs is related to the concept of trade-offs. Resources like money or land can be put to multiple uses. We have to choose as to what is the optimal way to use resources. The choice made is preferred over others. The best course of action is chosen among the competing choices, and others are discarded. Opportunity cost is the cost of discarding the second best choice. In a literal sense, it is the cost of the second best opportunity that is not chosen. For instance, money can be deposited in a bank earning interest or invested in stock market. If the latter is preferred, what is foregone, the interest that the money would have generated in a bank, is the opportunity cost. The concept is relevant in government finance. For example, the opportunity cost of government expenditure on health is what it could not spend on education or roads and the benefits missed in the process. If there is land owned by the government in a city and it can be used in many ways, the work of the economist is to choose from the following. Build hospital or school. Build a municipal park. Give it to a private investor free of cost, who will build a hospital or school and provide free services to poor and low-income groups. Sell it to the highest bidder. In an auction, the choice made depends on many factors, such as government's financial position, level of literacy, need for recreation facilities, etc. The choice made will have an opportunity cost. 4823 Sriram's last macro, micro and mesoeconomics. Macroeconomics includes the entire economy of a given unit, province, nation, or the world itself. For instance, variables like the size of the economy in the form of national income, economic growth rate, inflation, employment, foreign trade, poverty, and inequality are phenomena that characterize the economy as a whole, although with regional variations. On the other hand, microeconomics studies the units of the economy and the behavior of consumers, sellers, business firms, etc. Interest rates, although are a macroeconomic feature, but they impact the consumers, traders, and firms. Taxes impact prices and thus consumption and investment decisions. Consumer and business confidence are dependent on the state of economy. Consumer confidence or sentiment is the optimism of the consumer about the economy and their financial position. It is reflected in purchases and sales if they are confident, and thus economic growth. In a similar manner, business confidence helps in investment and growth picking up. Thus, micro and macro factors support each other. Mesoeconomics studies the intermediate level of economic organization in between the micro and the macroeconomics, like study of a sector of economics. Like auto, infrastructure may be considered mesoeconomics, while the study of each unit may fall under micro. Snippets. Macroeconomics and microeconomics belong to the same economic system and influence each other. Different schools of thought. There are many schools of thought and approaches in the field of economics based essentially on the relation between state and markets. Recently, concerns related to sustainability, welfare, and behavior are also emerging as centers of theory. Evolution of the discipline. As mentioned earlier, the discipline of economics started with focus on growth, which may also be understood as wealth generation. Adam Smith, the father of economics and the author of the classic, An Inquiry into the Nature and Causes of the Wealth of Nations, defined economics in two ways. One corresponds to the title of his book as The Science of Wealth. The other definition one is about markets being the best means of creation of wealth, the science relating to the laws of production, distribution, and exchange. Although he called economics a science, it is debatable. The urge to make it science is appreciated as policy becomes evidence-based and personal biases are drastically reduced. 5. 824. Initially, the definition in terms of wealth creation was attractive, but later it dawned that economic growth at any cost in the name of wealth was at the expense of equity, and the social groups that could not participate in the market economy were seen as liabilities, for example, women, children, and old people. Misery of the weak was taken as a necessary price for economic growth. Such a perspective, being unconscionable in democratic terms, underwent evolution, with markets, with a human face opinion gaining ground. There was a demand to balance wealth creation with focus on social and human welfare. Thus, came the shift in the focus to welfare economics. Growth should be accompanied by equity. All social groups should benefit from economic growth. It was achieved partly by factory legislation demanding of the employers that they limit work hours and provide just and humane conditions of work. Partly, the fiscal position of the government with tax collections also enabled the emergence of welfare economy. As the production process evolved and as more problems cropped up, the discipline expanded, bringing within its fold the need to balance growth with human development, environmental sustainability, human happiness, and so on, as we will see ahead. Fact check. Economics as a study incorporated social justice, and not money and goods alone. Political economy. We need another approach to understand the study of economic activity. It is the school of political economy. It states that politics and economics need to be studied together to understand why public, government, policy takes a particular stand. As an example, land reforms are a political decision for redistributive justice, but it impacts economic productivity, investment in agriculture, agri-exports, employment, and so on. We need to understand the politics of social and economic justice to understand land reforms. Bank nationalization has costs and benefits. The political dimension of financial inclusion, checking concentration of economic wealth, and planned economic development need to be grasped to understand why the policy was adopted in 1969 and 1980. They cannot be separated. The entire economic model based on liberalization, privatization, and globalization that became the global norm since 1980s can be understood partly from the political perspective of retreat and demise of communism as a political idea worldwide. The deglobalization that started sometime after the 2008 global financial and economic crisis, which is reflected in protectionism, protecting the domestic economy with high tariff wars on imports, and trade war nations fighting with high tariffs to weaken each other, can be understood only as a subject of political economy. Since 2016, the economic consequences of US-China trade. 6. 824. Sriram's Lars. Tensions are predominantly driven by political preferences of US leadership. It aims at addressing the anxieties of those who lost in the globalization process, like workers. Hence, it is a political response to popular demands expressed as economic policies. For example, if we talk of demonetization that took place in India in 2016, the entire process of choosing to embark on it was a political choice aimed at terminating black economy and enforcing fiscal laws strictly. The economy went through so many fundamental changes in banking, fiscal, industrial, agricultural sectors, and the likes. In China, Communist Party of China, a political party, decides how the economy is to be planned. The priorities and policies of economy are drastically altered according to the beliefs and biases of the political party and its leaders. Politics sets the framework in which economy operates. Hence, comprehending the two as they interconnect is the substance of political economy studies. While politicians set the values, economists set the prices. Liberal and neoliberal economics. Liberals do not like the control of the government. They believe that market participants are rational and take decisions in their best self-interest. Best technology and pricing strategy is adopted by the producers to be able to sell in a competitive market. Distributors use the best logistical systems and methods to store and transport. For the money the consumers spend, they want the best goods and services. The self-centered rationalities of all the economic actors. Producers, traders, consumers, and others adopt a collective and systemic rationality that guides the economy well. No separate moral intent exists. Self-interests of all create collective welfare for the system. Therefore, there is no need for government regulation except facilitating the collective interest to emerge as an aggregate of self-interests. This is the invisible hand. However, in course of time, examples of gross market failure were inequity, regional economic imbalances, climate change, etc., and thus there is a need for government regulation. Fact check. Example of the global financial crisis of 2008 is the failure of markets and the invisible hand not showing in rational action. Invisible hand. 18th century Scottish economist and philosopher, and a formidable proponent of laissez-faire economic policies, Adam Smith, in his first book, The Theory of Moral Sentiments, and later in his inquiry into the nature and causes of the wealth of nations in 1776, reasoned about the invisible hand, which refers to the unintended social and public benefits produced by individuals acting in their own self-interests. Achievement of the most efficient level of production, consumption. 7. 825. Sriram's Lars. And distribution of goods in the society happens without wishing. It secures the welfare of the society. The self-interest of each, when rationally followed, becomes the common interest of all. On the basis of this premise, Adam Smith said that there is an invisible hand that drives the economy well, hence negating the need for state regulation. State should only be providing support services like public goods, police, judiciary, essential infrastructure, etc. Adam Smith answered the critics of capitalism with this concept, stating that it could lead to lack of stability and neglect of welfare. However, multiple crises in capitalism were present since then, and also great amount of misery and inequality that the theory of invisible hand might not be able to explain. The euphoria in markets based on the principle of laissez-faire, French term meaning let people do as they choose, it stands for minimum government control by way of laws and regulations in economic transactions, did not find justification in the decades after Industrial Revolution in the mid-18th century. Hence, the central premises of liberal school were: individual economic actors are rational, and so state does not need to regulate their actions by way of too many laws. State should provide only public goods, and thus facilitate economic activity, and economy should be left to the market forces. Laissez-faire liberalism as a philosophy suffers from many infirmities. Rationality of the producer is to maximize profit, and if human misery, steep economic inequality, and environmental degradation result from it, liberals after Adam Smith could not justify. Market failure also is a relevant issue. Market failure is an inefficient distribution of goods and services in the free market that has negative impact for vast areas of society and geographies. Consumer rationality is contorted by paucity of reliable information and asymmetric information, that is, when one party to an economic transaction possesses greater knowledge than the other party. Neoliberalism. While the economies grew initially based on the above philosophy, there was widespread poverty and exclusion created by the economic growth. As a reaction, welfare and socialist schools of economics emerged. However, by the late 20th century, liberalism found renewed favor with the world after all other models of growth showed their inadequacies, as we will see ahead. The return of liberalism in the late last century is known as neoliberalism. Any school of thought that returns after decline is given the prefix neo. Neoliberal philosophy did not change much from liberal assumptions and policies. It returned to popularity because its adherence to free market economic model was proven historically right, as communist command economy state commands the economy in its decisions, with state ownership did not yield long. 8. 825. Sriram's Lars. Term growth and proved to be antithetical to innovation and entrepreneurship. Neoliberals championed, as earlier, for withdrawal of state from economic activities, globalization, privatization, price deregulation, etc. In summary, that government is the best which governs the least. Margaret Thatcher, who was British Prime Minister between 1979 and 1990, privatized many government industries and utilities: steel, railways, airways, airports, gas, electricity, telecom, and water. Donald Trump, American President, 2016 to 2020, discarded the Obamacare health insurance program and EUT down the corporate tax rate steeply. These are two typical examples of neoliberal preferences. Neoliberalism is the same as Washington consensus, the free market approach of the IMF and other institutions. Individualism, competition, economic rationality, and efficiency are its basic values. India's economic reforms since 1991 are largely centered around privatization of government companies, reduction of corporate tax rates, liberalized entry to foreign investment, are some essential neoliberal policies that Indian government follows. While supporters of neoliberal schools cite the above advantages, critics hold that inclusivity suffers, inequality sharpens, public services will be neglected and even rolled back, education and health, when privatized, will harm public interest, environmental degradation could deteriorate as profiteering and growth at any cost may become the motive, and so on. Snippets. The economic crisis created by the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020 questioned the premise of the neoliberal premise that state should retreat from social investments and welfare interventions and leave it to the market. It is the widespread belief even among the liberals that state has an important social role to play in building up human capital. Keynesian economics. Keynesian economics believes in the liberal economic principles. It has been popular for about a century for its rescue of declining economic growth, with prescription of stimulus when the economy slows down relatively, dramatically, or stops growing or goes into negative mode of degrowth. The Keynesian solution is defined as pump priming the economy, which is as follows: fiscal stimulus. Government should borrow and spend on infrastructure and other core economic activities that adds in more investment by the private sector, and thus public and private sector investment come together to create employment, demand, and business. For instance, Bharat Mala for national highways and Pradhan Mantri Gram Sadak Yojana, PMGSY. 111 lakh crore, $1.5 trillion, national infrastructure pipeline for 2019 to 2025, for building new roads, rail links, and other social and economic infrastructure, is another example. Monetary stimulus. The central bank should reduce interest rates and make more money available to consumers and investors, thus creating demand and supply. 9825. Reserve Bank of India has reduced repo rate and expanded money supply through multiple means during the pandemic 2020 to arrest the fall of the economy and revived this as a tried and tested solution for general macroeconomic slowdown. It was practiced successfully across the world, including India, in the aftermath of the global economic crisis and deep recession that lasted for a few years since 2008. Snippet. Socialist economics centers on a major part of economy in government hands, by which employment-centric and non-inflationary growth can be created, inequality can be minimized, and can provide workers greater control of the means of production. Socialist and communist economics. Communist economics is complete ownership of the national economy in government hands, and there's no room for private property. It has multiple forms. Nehruvian socialism, where public and private sector coexist and complement each other, called mixed economy. An extreme form of socialist economies is communist control, for example, Soviet economy and China under Mao Zedong, 1893 to 1976. Nehruvian economics. Last, it is a part of socialist economics. It was the economic and political idea of Jawaharlal Nehru, 1889 to 1964, who was the first Prime Minister of India. It rests on state ownership of infrastructure, higher education, metal, and other industries, etc., through centralized socio-economic planning. India adopted Nehruvian socialism for multiple reasons. Soviet Russia showed that it was an expeditious way of achieving equitable growth. Nehru believed in the values of welfare state and equity. It facilitated self-reliance in economic growth, and India lacked any significant private sector when we became independent. Gandhian economics. It is the set of ideas that Mahatma Gandhi, 1869 to 48, propounded for economic growth and distribution. It has a unique socialist content. Gandhian socialism is not centered around state policies, but is a decentralized and labor-intensive growth of economy and certain moral prescriptions like minimization of desire, dignity of labor, and rich should hold social wealth as a trustee for the poor. Mahatma Gandhi questioned the scarcity assumption when he said, "Earth provides enough to satisfy every man's need, but not for every man's greed." 10. 826. Gandhian socialism and economic thought is based on household and locally oriented production, using local resources to meet local needs, so that there is full and gainful employment, promoting the ideal of Sarvodaya, the welfare of all. Gandhian economy aims to boost employment that is very desirable for India where there is abundance of labor. It did not reject machinery and welcomed it when it avoids drudgery and reduces monotony, for instance, sewing machine. However, it is opposed to labor displacing technology. It emphasizes dignity of labor and criticizes society's contemptuous attitude to manual labor. It insists on everybody doing some bread labor to live by one's own labor to satisfy all one's primary needs, both moral and physical, an idea that Gandhi borrowed from Leo Tolstoy and John Ruskin. Another principle of Gandhian economics is trusteeship. Even as an individual or group of individuals is free to set up an economic enterprise and accumulate wealth, the surplus wealth above what is necessary to meet basic needs and investment should be held as a trust for the welfare of all, particularly of the poorest and most destitute. It combines economics of employment-intensive development with ethics of equity, self-reliance where local needs are met locally, with minimum wants, sustainability, trust, and cooperation. Development economics. Many countries were decolonized after the World War II. Their economies were distorted and destroyed by the imperialist countries, and there was widespread poverty, steep inequality, and no sizable private sector. Traditional schools of economics did not have strategies that combined democratic values with fast and equitable economic growth. The focus of development economics was these impoverished countries. Their concern was to bring about inclusive economic growth that is otherwise referred to as development, the challenge of promoting economic growth and structural change from agriculture to industry to services, but also improving the well-being of the population as a whole through focus on health, education, and employment, whether through public or private channels, or a blend of the two through public-private partnerships. The most prominent contemporary development economists are Nobel laureates Amartya Sen, Joseph Stiglitz, Abhijit Banerjee, and also Jean Dries and Jeffrey Sachs. State capitalism, or Beijing consensus. There are many ways of understanding state capitalism. One is that the state owns large businesses itself and they coexist with the private sector. It is the simplest model, which is also called mixed economy, and we find it in India. State capitalism in China is different. This is a form of market economy capitalism, in which the authoritarian state acts as the dominant economic player by owning and controlling businesses, and uses markets primarily for political capital. This model of state capitalism is called Beijing consensus, which is offered as a rival of the Washington consensus. In the Beijing consensus, state sets long-term strategic 11. 826. Goals and priorities, and pursues them in multi-year plans. It is a mix of state, market, and redistribution. Its growing global reach reflects the success of Chinese economy, particularly during the pandemic, 2020, when Chinese economy recovered earlier than others. State capitalism also describes a system in which the state intervenes in the economy to protect and advance the interests of large-scale businesses. For example, the bailouts that the large companies received from the US government after the Lehman crisis in 2008, when their survival was in question. Similarly, during the 2020 pandemic, governments bailed out many companies whose growth drastically fell to zero. Fact check. Officially, it is called socialism with Chinese characteristics, but critics call it capitalism with Chinese characteristics. Mercantilism. Mercantile school mandates that government should develop policies for scaling up net exports, because the principal way of making sure a country's prosperity is by encouraging exports, as the whole global economy becomes the target. It will also set about a foreign exchange reserve accumulation and other benefits via foreign investments, technology transfer and development, educate the labor force, commercially attractive loans, etc. These reserves can be utilized to depreciate the currency and provide additional edge to foreign trade, although it can attract global backlash. In the past century, mercantilists assumed that any country with enormous gold reserves could govern the world. It is the assimilation of foreign currency that is the largest advantage, as gold is limited in the current global economic order. Currently, there are two models of mercantilism. China stuck to mercantilist policies and moved global trade balance in its support by exporting to the whole world by dealing with massive economies of scale for global consumption since the 1980s. But it did not have to obey import substitution policies associated with mercantilism. Import substitution is using domestically produced goods rather than importing the same. It required imports to create its exports. Its main aim was on export-oriented economic development, for which it generously permitted multinationals into its economy sector who are motivated to export. Chinese companies moved ahead in competition and began exporting. Another instance is the trade policies observed by the United States under President Donald Trump, who assumed that the US trade deficit with the rest of the world had to be reduced. His mercantilism is based on the following points. Engage in trade wars with all crucial trading partners of the US. Imposing high tariff walls on imports. 12. 827. Sriram has. Renegotiation of long-standing trade agreements, like North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, became United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement. USMCA, with terms that were pro-US. Application of bilateral pressure via state dominance for opening up markets for American exports. Make the multilateral trade body, World Trade Organization, WTO, role difficult by debilitating its dispute settlement process. Invocating national security clauses in an uncommon manner in the WTO to fall back on high import duties. Medium black circle to bar human capital from outside US by making the immigration norms strict. Behavioral economics is defined as a multidisciplinary study and application that makes use of results from multiple fields of study to comprehend economic behavior of individuals and impact the same. Richard Thaler, the winner of the Nobel Memorial Prize in Economic Sciences in 2017, is attributed to this. He questioned the perspective of logical expectations in economics. Richard Thaler's ideas led to the formation of behavioral science teams, also known as nudge units, to drive and impact people's behavior. A significant difference to micro and macro economy can be made by the nudges. It can result in ameliorating savings, making people follow tax laws, aiding people in formalizing their businesses. Adopting cleanliness, swak barat, volunteering social work for health or education or traffic management, etc. Nudges aided in adopting COVID appropriate behavior during the pandemic. Richard Thaler's behavioral economics theory, nudge economics, was brought to use in the Economic Survey 2019 to bring in social modification through better implementation of schemes. Green economics. Economic growth was followed by environmental costs like air, water, and land pollution at a rate that pressurized human and social well-being. It made economic development non-sustainable, as it exhausted natural resources and resulted in productivity losses. The School of Green Economics emphasizes sustainability issues and advises harmonious relationship between humans and nature and makes an attempt to reunite the two. One can see instances in the field of agriculture, green revolution in India that deteriorated land due to commercialization of agriculture, by groundwater overdraft irrigation, where an unequal mixture of small and big dams led to environmental deterioration by deforestation, industrial development induced by fossil fuels that caused global warming, and so on. One of the earliest warnings was Thomas Malthus's An Essay on the Principle of Population, 1798. We were made aware of the threat of unsustainability by the Limits to Growth Report in 1972 by the Club of Rome. 13. 827. Published by the UN's World Commission on Environment and Development, 1987, commonly known as Brundtland Commission, as it was led by Gro Harlem Brundtland. Our common future explains sustainable development as the type of development that satisfies the needs of the present without negotiating the capacity of future generations to satisfy their own needs, which is sustainable development focused on intergenerational equity. Green economies recommend sustaining and promoting environmental, economic, and social well-being. New metrics of calculating growth have been developed to boost Green Economy Social Progress Index, Green GDP, and Environmental Performance Index, EPI, are some examples. Millennium Development Goals, MDGs, and Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, also recommend green economics. Snippets. The 2018 Nobel Prize in Economic Sciences went to William Nordhaus for merging climate change into long-run macroeconomic analysis. Dasgupta Review, 2021. In 2019, the UK government authorised Cambridge University economist Partha Dasgupta to supply a global review on the economics of biodiversity. The Economics of Biodiversity, the Dasgupta Review, was published in 2021. Fact check. As per Dasgupta Review, biodiversity is declining at a faster rate than at any time in the history of humans, threatening the nature's productivity, adaptability, and resilience, which ensues extreme economy risk and unreliability. The report asserts that natural capital, long neglected by economic belief, should be observed as an asset, such as manufactured goods and human capital. Humanity's dependence on nature for the increased demands of natural resource extraction and waste disposal have exceeded the nature's ability to provide, putting the welfare of current and future generations at risk. As per the review, between 1992 and 2014, manufactured goods and services increased twofold per capita. Human capital, like knowledge, health, and skills, rose 17% per capita. And natural capital, forests, lakes, etc., decreased 40% per person. In summary, instead of being separate from nature, as it has been the main thought since a long time, the report asserts that the global economy relies on and is embedded in nature. The report advocates three major changes. 1. First, nature's supply must be raised relative to current levels and humanity's demands on nature must not exceed nature's supply. 2. Second, as gross domestic product, GDP, does not consider natural asset depreciation, natural capital must be launched into national accounting systems. 3. Third, environmental awareness must be launched to education programs and financial institutions must be transformed. 14. 827, Sriram's last chapter, 2. Measuring economy growth concepts and institutions chapter highlights 1. Measuring economic growth 2. National income 3. Seasonality 4. Potential GDP introduction. Economic growth enables our multiple needs to be met. The benefits of economic growth are wealth creation, helps create jobs and increase incomes leading to an increase in the standard of living. Government earns more tax revenues, fiscal dividend, which the government earnment can use to finance capital formation and welfare. For example, the flagship programs of the government like Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana Gramin, PMAYG, Pradhan Mantri Ujjwala Yojana, PMUY, Deen Dayal Upadhyaya Gram, Jyoti Yojana, DDUGJY. Pradhan Mantri Gram Sadak Yojana, PMGSY, Ayushman Bharat, Saubhagya are a direct result of the tax buoyancy of growth. It sets up the positive spiral. Rising demand encourages investment in new capital machinery, which helps accelerate economic growth, which will create more employment. Brings about more investment in technology and sustainable modes of development like promotion of renewable energy. However, economic growth historically is associated with malcontents too. Inequalities, poverty, environmental degradation, and mental stress, etc. 15.828, Sriram's last factors of production inputs are called factors of production or resources. They are the building blocks of the economy. The 4 factors of production are as follows: 1. Land 2. Labor 3. Capital 4. Enterprise. Snippets. Economic production is essentially value addition. Value is added to inputs to produce goods and services. The first 3 are brought together to produce a commodity by the fourth one. There are 2 types of factors: primary and secondary. Primary factors are land, labor, the capacity to work, and capital goods. Materials and energy, fuel, are secondary factors, as they are produced from land, labor, and capital. Land includes not only the site of production, but natural resources above or below the soil. It includes any natural resource used to produce goods and services, as they all come from the land. Examples of such natural resources are water, minerals like oil, natural gas, coal, and forests. Land resources are the raw materials in the production process. They are both renewable, like forests, or non-renewable, such as oil or natural gas. The income that resource owners earn from land resources is called rent. Labor is the human effort towards the production of goods and services. Labor is paid wages. Labor consists of many types of workers and employees. A blue-collar worker is a member of the working class who performs manual labor. A white-collar worker is a salaried professional or an office manager. A pink-collar worker is a member of the working class in positions such as receptionists, retail clerks, salespersons, etc. The original term was used to describe jobs that were typically held by women. Now the meaning has changed to encompass all lower-rung service jobs. Capital includes machinery, tools, and buildings humans use to produce goods and services. Capital has many forms: physical, technological, financial, human, experience, knowledge and skills, intellectual, social networks of relationships necessary for cooperative work for production of value, and even civic citizens working together for facilitating rule of law, right to business, good governance, which are crucial for economic growth. The 4th factor of production is entrepreneurship. An entrepreneur is a person who combines the other factors of production: land, labor, and capital to earn a profit. Entrepreneurs take risk, create new processes. 16. 828. Sriram's Lars. Technologies and products and services. They are innovators. Entrepreneurs thrive in economies where there is ease of doing businesses so that they can compete and innovate. Business cycles: slowdown, recession, Great Recession, and depression. Economic growth is cyclical. There are periods of economic expansion, growth, stagnation, or decline. It is built into the nature of a nation's economy that boom is followed by bust. In boom, more is produced due to the economies of scale. Thick make supplies cheap, as goods are produced in bulk. Its sales take time and there is slowdown. Alternating periods of growth and slowdown in economic activity is called business cycle. When slowdown leads to negative growth, it is called recession or degrowth. Factors not inherent in the growth process can also cause such slowdowns. Commodity prices can rise and create inflation that can reduce demand, and so there is slowdown. Banking crisis, banned loans, and non-recovery can take place when economic expansion comes to a halt. When an economy slows down to a level where it starts to produce less than what it produced earlier, it is in a recession. It may be called contraction or degrowth. Macroeconomic indicators like investment, consumption, employment, capacity utilization, government tax revenues all show decline and may even go into negative territory. Generally, when economic growth slows based on the rate of growth, it is not recession. There is still net positive production in relation with the comparable quarter or year. Fact check: pandemic of 2020 did cause recession in almost every country, but some countries could not revive growth and had worsening of recession into depression. 17.829. Recession is different. Technically, recession is when in 2 successive quarters of economic production is less than the same 2 quarters in the previous year in terms of value. 10, 1, 0, 4, 62, 56, 57, 54, 46, 5. Minus 10, minus 15, minus 20, minus 25, minus 30, 2011 to 10 Q2 Q1 Q3 2018 to 20 Q NA 01 Q2 minus 2039 to 21 Q1 Q2 Q3 figure after 2 successive quarters of contraction. India's GDP bounces back. Source: GOI. In figure the first 2 fiscal years 2018-19 and 2019-20 there was a slowdown. But it became recession in the next fiscal year, that is 2020 to 21, as can be seen in the first 2 quarters when there was a fall in production. But from the 3rd quarter, positive growth resumed. Recession may be caused by various events, such as a financial crisis, 2008, an external trade shock, exports suffer, or imports cost much more, an adverse supply shock, price shock, or physical supplies, etc. Pandemic, 2020, has caused the worst recession since 1930s when the Great Depression occurred globally. Fact check. Indian economy shrank 23.9% in the April-June quarter, Q1, of 2020 to 21 from the same quarter in 2019 to 20. In the July-September quarter, Q2, of 2020 to 21, the Indian economy contracted 7.5% from the same quarter in 2019 to 20. Thus, 2 successive quarters of degrowth in absolute terms constituted economic recession. Fact check. Recession generally is associated with prices dropping steeply. But India has seen inflation during recession in 2021 for reasons that we will see in the chapter on inflation. It is called stagflation, as a stagnant economy suffers from inflation. Governments usually respond to recessions by adopting expansionary to macroeconomic policies, Keynesian stimulus, such as increasing government spending and decreasing taxation, and increasing money supply through the 18. Q3. 829. Sriram's Lars. Monetary authority. Recession may end with the corrective measures taken by the government and the market. If it does not end in relapses for any reason, due to external or internal shocks or inability of the governments to invest to lift the economy out of recession, it is called double-dip recession. If the Great Recession did not get corrected and became worse with a contraction of the GDP by approximately 10% after the recession set in, it is called depression. Snippets. When recession worsens, degrowth deepens with more job losses and even greater deflation. It is called Great Recession, which lasted in the world for some years after the Lehman crisis in 2008. Measuring economic growth. Economic growth is the change, increase, or decrease in the value of goods and services produced by an economy. Measuring economic growth is crucial as it reveals many macroeconomic trends that matter for public and private sector. All important aspects of economy are linked to growth, consumptions, food security, tax collections, interest rates, inflation, employment, foreign trade, and so on. Consumption and investment decisions depend on the growth and inflation rate, to give one example. That is the reason for National Statistical Office, NSO, of India to project growth figures weeks before the union budget is presented, facilitating rational projection of revenues and expenditure for the upcoming fiscal year. It will facilitate the union government to have reasonable estimates for the coming year. To amplify further, measuring economic growth is necessary as when growth is quantified, we can understand whether it is adequate or not for the given goals of the economy. We can understand its potential and accordingly set targets. We can adjust growth rates sustainably. We can prevent inflation or deflation to some extent if we see the performance of the economy in quantitative terms. We can balance the contributions of the 3 sectors of the economy and steer the direction of growth towards national goals away from agriculture to manufacturing and services, as in the case of India in recent years. Target appropriate levels of employment creation and poverty alleviation. Forecast tax revenues for governmental objectives. Corporates can plan their business investments. The beginnings of the measurement of economy are as follows. In the US, the Great Depression, 1929 to 39, could be ended only when data was available. Simon Kuznets, an economist, gave the notion of national income in 1930s to capture all economic production in the country. It is popularly known as gross domestic product, GDP, and gross national product, GNP. The rules and methods which are used to collect and measure economic growth data are known as national income accounting. 19829. Snippets. Franklin D. Roosevelt, President of the United States in 1933, commissioned a study on how to measure the output of the American economy by Simon Kuznets, 1901 to 1983. Subsequently, Kuznets received the Nobel Prize in Economics. GDP and GNP. GDP is defined as the total market value of all final goods and services produced within the country in a given period of time, usually a calendar or financial year, or a fraction, like a quarter. While GDP includes the production within a country by all producers, citizens, as well as foreign multinational corporations, GNP captures all that is produced by the citizens of a country, whether it is within the geography of the country or abroad. GDP is a geography-related concept, while GNP is a citizen-related. GDP focuses on where the output is produced, while GNP shows who produced it. GNP is GDP plus net factor income from abroad. That is, from the domestic product, we need to deduct what the foreigners have produced in the country, and to that amount we need to add what citizens have produced outside the country. In the age of MNCs and globalization, one country's GDP is another country's GNP. For example, in the case of a German-owned car factory operating in the US, the profits from the factory would be counted as part of German GNP and US GDP. If it is a highly globalized and competitive economy, and many of its MNCs are operating in other countries, its GNP tends to be more. For example, Japan. Chinese GDP was much more than its GNP till last decade, as many foreign MNCs were operating in China. But with China's Belt and Road Initiative gaining ground, its GNP is catching up with its GDP. If MNCs relocate out of China due to the trade tensions with the US, its GDP will diminish even more relative to its GNP. In a closed economy, GDP is more. For example, India till we opened up in 1991. For most countries, however, GDP and GNP have more or less the same values. But when we take the case of Ireland, its GNP is much larger than its GDP. In Ireland, Google, Apple, Microsoft, Accenture and such other multinational corporations are headquartered due to the tax advantage they get as corporate tax rates are very low. They only have registered offices in Ireland without any production activity. The higher GNP value, however, is illusory, as these companies are in reality non-Irish. Ireland is a tax haven, thus, attracting companies to register there rather than giving them the ecosystem for production and innovation, as China did since 1980s. In fact, it is countries like Cayman Islands, Ireland, Bermuda, Singapore that are in focus at the global level in discussions around mandating a minimum level of corporate tax. There are remittances from abroad sent by Indians working across the world, and they amounted to about $83 billion in 2020, but that is outnumbered by 20. 830. Sriram's Lars. The outflows on a variety of accounts, interest payments, dividend, royalty on technology, etc. Snippets. India's GDP is a slightly more than its GNP, as inbound foreign direct investment, FDI, is many times its more Thomas G. Adian MNCs produce far less abroad than what foreign MNCs produce in India. GDP versus GNP. Largely, GDP is a better measure than GNP to gauge the benefits to national economy. The reason is that GDP is domestic production, where employment is created, inflation is moderated, tax revenues are buoyant, where exports help in foreign exchange reserve build-up, and so on. GNP also has its advantages, and India is a big beneficiary of it, including remittances from abroad, acquisition of foreign companies, investments abroad to tap on foreign opportunities, and so on. However, the consensus is that the former is of greater value than the latter for the reasons cited. In fact, in reality, if a country has a higher GNP than GDP, it is a robust economy with state of productivity. It reached the global standards only after domestic economy has been strengthened. The case of Ireland is different. Mace's gross value added, GVA. GDP without the indirect taxes is gross value added, GVA. It is an accurate productivity metric of the economic product and the rate of growth, as indirect tax accumulated on a commodity does not count as contribution to the progress of the economy. Once the indirect taxes of a commodity price are removed from its market price, it is known as basic price. GVA emerges when the basic prices of all goods and services produced are computed. For example, if the government remunerates as much as a subsidy of 1 on any good or service, the commodities become affordable to an extent, and the value of the GDP at market price and GVA are reduced. Later in the chapter, we will study GDP at factor cost as a separate economic productivity metric and the reason for its construction. As an example, let's talk about petrol. The retail price of petrol in mid-2021 was 104 Indian rupees per litre, 60% of which accounted for indirect taxes, state taxes, a value-added tax or VAT, and central excise and central cess. Hence, the basic price of petrol was a little more than 40, after deducting indirect taxes from market price. Therefore, according to this example, if petrol makes up the GDP, GVA is far less than GDP, as indirect taxes are the predominant part of market price. GVA aids in establishing the GDP tax relationship. For instance, the discrepancy is caused by tax buoyancy if the GDP growth is not similar to the GVA. If the output continues to grow and the tax buoyancy is not commensurate, it may mean that either the non-tax part of the GDP is growing, agriculture, for example, or there is tax evasion, or both. The GDP might be high if the indirect tax 21. 830. Collections increase at a rapid rate. GVA is not impacted due to indirect tax cuts, as it represents real value added. Estimating GDP. GDP can be evaluated according to the following parameters. Market value of final goods and services is added by the output approach. Consumption, investment, government expenditure, and net exports, exports minus imports, are added by the expenditure approach. The revenue earned by factors, land, labor, capital and enterprises, like wages, profits, rents and so on, are added by the income approach. These three parameters must produce the same outcomes, since the total disbursement on goods and services, GSE, must, by default, be equivalent to the value of the goods and services produced, or GNP, which in turn must match the total income remunerated to the factors that manufactured these goods and services. As a matter of fact, minor differences will be present in the results acquired from the various parameters. This is due to the fact that some goods in the inventory have been manufactured, hence, included in GDP, but not yet traded. In addition, remunerations might not have been generated yet, which is, the interest on loans, and salaries or rents have not been reimbursed. Hence, the value of goods and services manufactured is generated, but it is not equal to the income or expenditure. Inventory is an elaborate index of all stock items. GDP takes only marketed goods into consideration. For example, if a cleaner is employed, his salary is covered in the GDP. If one performs the task themselves, it does not add to the GDP. Another suitable example would be of the homemakers involved in daily chores, taking care of the children or the aged, and so on, also known as care economy, which is outside the scope of GDP. Only final goods and services are considered while estimating GDP. Goods that are either consumed or used in the production of another good or service are known as final goods. For instance, a car sold to a consumer and a car used as a cab are both final goods. The former entity is consumption and the latter entity is investment. As part of the final value, inputs and intermediates are not calculated. If the prices of intermediate goods are included in the computation of GDP, it would lead to duplicate counting. For instance, the value of car tires would be calculated twice, once when they are sold to the car manufacturer and again when the car is sold to the customer. It results in artificial inflation of the production value. Some of the goods are characterized both as inputs and final goods. An accurate example of intermediate, input, goods is car tires sold to a car manufacturer. It would be characterized as a final good if the same tires are sold to a consumer. Only newly manufactured goods are counted when calculating GDP. Transactions in existing goods, example, second-hand cars and houses, do not involve the production of new goods and hence are not included. In resale, however, service charges issued by the agents are calculated. An example would be the commission charged by the auto or the real estate agent. Indirect taxes accumulated on it are added to the GDP. 22. 831. Sriram's laws. There are attribute values of GDP. For example, the government presumes all houses to be rented, as it is not possible for the government to verify which property is owner-occupied and which is not. Hence, the rental value of all properties is a part of GDP. It is also known as imputation. GDP and NDP. Real and nominal GDP. GDP can be characterized as real or nominal GDP without adjusting for inflation is nominal GDP. For instance, the market value of GDP varies depending upon inflation or deflation, even if the amount of production is the same as last year. Inflation increases market value, while deflation decreases. Real GDP denotes the current year manufacturing of goods and services valued at prices of the year of comparison. Hence, current manufacturing valued at, for example, former year prices, provides an accurate demarcation in production between the 2 years. The rest is price difference. A statistical illusion because of inflation might exist, which can hamper decision-making, unless we know the real production. Snippets. GDP is a gross value. The productive machinery and infrastructure undergo wear and tear in the production of goods and services. Monetary value could be attributed to such depreciation. We end up with net domestic product, NDP, when we remove depreciation from GDP. New Delhi. GDP deflator. Arriving at real from nominal involves the use of deflator. It helps deduct the contribution of inflation to the value of the output. GDP deflator is a price index. When we value the current production at base year prices or prices of any other year for comparison, price changes are captured. For example, if 10 apples made up the GDP last year of base year, and the market value was 10, and the current year's GDP is valued at 15, it does not automatically mean that in the current year 15 apples are produced. The number may be anything 1 apple or more. In order to arrive at the number of apples produced in the current year, we have to find out the price change from the previous year. If prices are constant, the number of apples produced is 15. If there is inflation, it is fewer, and if there is deflation, it is greater. So, as per GDP deflator, if we produced only 10 apples in the current year also, then inflation is 50% on a base of 10, which is the value of the GDP last year a base year. GDP deflator shows it as 50%, which is inflation. It is called deflator because it takes the value of the current year and compares into the last year a base year, and thus, we generally go from high to low prices. It is deflation from the current to the previous a base year, and inflation from 23. 831. Sriram's last. Previous base year to current year. The value is the same. The terms are different for the reasons mentioned above. A change in prices can distort the perception of actual gross domestic product even without an increase or decrease in the quantity of goods and services produced by an economy. Therefore, the impact of prices has to be removed to arrive at a true measure of economic growth. Thereby lies the value of the GDP deflator. GDP deflator is a measure of inflation that tracks the price changes in the entire economy and not a specific limited basket of goods and services, as in the price indices of Wholesale Price Index, WPI, and Consumer Price Index, CPI. It is implicitly derived from national accounts data as a ratio of GDP at current prices to constant prices. It is available with a long lag and hence has very limited use for remedial measures related to inflation on a short-term basis. Snippets. When GDP deflator is in the negative, nominal GDP is less than real GDP, it means there's deflation in the country. GDP at market price and factor cost. Market price refers to the actual transacted price, and it includes indirect taxes, which are goods and services tax, GST, custom duty, and so on. Factor costs are the actual production costs at which goods and services are produced by the firms and industries in an economy. They are the costs of all the factors of production, such as land, labor, and capital. This means the rent of the land along with the cost of resources that the land supports, the interest on the capital that is used to buy various inputs, labor which has to be paid wages, and the profit that the entrepreneur takes. Factor cost refers to the price arrived at after deducting indirect taxes from the market price and adding to the resulting number government subsidies, if any. MP, market price, equals FC, factor cost, plus indirect taxes subsidies. If the market price is 100, indirect taxes are 18, subsidies are 8, then the factor cost will be 118 plus 8 is equal to 90. The concept of GDP at factor cost is useful to see how competitive market forces are and how distortionary indirect taxes are. For example, the market value of the contribution of the petroleum sector to the GDP of India currently, 2021, is quite largely due to indirect taxes, and not the value of the product. If there is high productivity of factors, there is no need to subsidize. The differentiation helps public policy to rationalize both indirect taxes and subsidies. National income is calculated by deducting indirect taxes from net national product and adding subsidies. National income, NI, is NNP at factor cost. 24.832, Sriram's last snippets, NI and NP indirect taxes, subsidies, transfer payments are a one-way payment of money for which no good or service is received in exchange. Governments use such payments as means of income redistribution, universal basic income, under social welfare programs, such as Social Security, old age or disability pensions, student grants, unemployment compensation, and so on. Transfer payments are not a part of the GDP. There is a need to differentiate them from subsidies. Transfer payments are a part of personal income. Subsidies paid to exporters, farmers, manufacturers are not considered transfer payments because they are linked to a commodity transaction. Transfer payments may be conditional cash transfers or unconditional cash transfers, universal basic income. Under the Indira Gandhi Matritva Sahayog Yojana, IGMSY, GOL provides financial aid to pregnant women who undergo institutional delivery in hospitals. The aid is also meant to help with the child's vaccination, as well as nutritional food. The money is directly transferred to the bank accounts of pregnant women. Pradhan Mantri Ujjwala Yojana helps select beneficiaries access stoves free and LPG cylinders at a subsidized price. It is a subsidy and not a transfer. Fact check. Indira Gandhi Matritva Sahayog Yojana, IGMSY, is aimed at encouraging institutional deliveries in order to reduce maternal as well as infant mortality. IGMSY is a transfer payment, and it is a conditional cash transfer. Under Pradhan Mantri Kisan Samman Nidhi, PM Kisan, of the Government of India, direct cash transfers are made to the farmers, those who own land. Rithu Bandhu Scheme, Farmers Investment Support Scheme, FISS, is a welfare program to support farmers' investment for 2 crops a year by the Government of Telangana. The government provides farmers a certain amount per acre per season to support the farmers source their inputs. These disbursements are not a part of the government expenditure under the GDP calculations, technically. It is the discretion of the government to include them or not, as some governments do include them as a part of GDP to show a higher GDP number. Universal Basic Income, UBI, that the government gives is a one-way transfer and is not a payment involving purchase. Therefore, such expenditure is not included in the GDP. Fact check. In 2020, as a part of Prime Minister Garib Kalyan Package, PMGKP, government made cash payment to women, poor senior citizens and farmers as direct benefit transfer, DBT. 25. 832. Base year, current and constant estimates. A base year with which the current year, or any other year can be differentiated, has to be present for the economic growth to be measured. In contrast with the base year, it demonstrated whether the economy or any other macroeconomic productivity metrics, such as prices, employment, etc., are propagating, positively or negatively, and at what rate. Therefore, base year is chosen for comparison with ether years. To make percentage comparisons case year, it has a value of 100. As the economy progresses, a new base year is chosen. The requirement for base year can be elaborated as follows. For instance, the rate of nominal growth is 8% if GDP is worth 100 rupees in the base year 2011 to 12, and 108 rupees in the next year, 2012 to 13. In both the years, a similar class of goods and services is used. New goods produced in the years after the base year is fixed, are not included in the GDP statistics, and are not considered for comparison. It is a necessity for precise differentiation. However, it is a restraint while measuring growth between 2 points. Since the base year prices make up the base for comparison of 2 or more figures, they are considered constant. It has a value of 100 in an index. The current value is defined as the market value of the current year GDP for the given output. Real growth rate is generated when the value is set at base year prices, constant prices. Real output, base year prices, is derived from the real growth rate, which is different from the nominal output, current prices. The real increase of goods and services is found when the increase in the value of the GDP due to inflation is excluded. National income series consists of compilation of growth figures of all the years having the same base year. The goods and services in the base year production class undergo changes in due course of time. Some become outdated and are no longer, or much less in manufacturing, per typewriters. Reweighing might be needed. Novel goods and services might have been introduced in the market and require a spot in the basket, example, iPads. Hence, a periodical change of the base year of national accounts is essential to gauge an exact assessment of economic production and growth. For instance, an example of novel origin goods is software, smartphones, etc., and the same would be not tracked if the base year was in the 1990s. Hence, the numbers are unable to provide an accurate assessment of growth and its related metrics like employment, inflation, exports, etc. In the same manner, if we keep measuring the goods and services that are non-existent in manufacturing as they were, for example, jute, typewriters, etc., we perceive the decline in production as a fall in production, while, in actual fact, they have been replaced by new products. Hence, the base year requires to be set closer to the current year. As per the National Statistical Commission recommendation, the base year should be revised every 5 years. Base year is chosen as per the following criteria. A base year should be set in close proximity to the current year. The data should be available on a reliable basis. 26. 832. 3. Sriram's Las. The base year should not be an atypical year with excessive variations because of my one-off events, like demonetization, war, severe drought, and so on. For instance, fiscal year 2020 to 21 was an unusual year for monitoring growth because of the havoc created by the pandemic, and hence cannot be labeled as the base year. Seasonality. Same periods need to be chosen while measuring and comparing economic growth. For example, if we stipulate that the economic growth in a specified quadrant of the year is 5%, it denotes that on the base applied by the same quarter in the former year, there is a 5% growth. Seasonality means comparing same periods. To simplify, comparison of the same seasons should be done. The true purpose of seasonal comparison is to make sure that the fluctuation in GDP, or any other economic productivity metric, like inflation, employment, foreign financial inflows, accurately indicate true patterns in economic activity. Seasonal determination of economic output takes place. For instance, in the October-December quadrant, festivals like Dussehra, Diwali, Christmas, etc., are present, so there is manufacturing and purchase increases. The kharif crop also enters the market in this period. The quarter of October-December in any given year consists of the above-mentioned important events, and hence is deemed comparable when the months of July-September of the current year with same quarters in the former years are compared. It gives applicable results because the southwest monsoons commence in June and the rainfall continues for 2 to 3 months, impacting construction-related activities. Potential GDP. New Delhi. Potential output shows what the economy can produce without weakening the macroeconomic productivity metrics such as inflation, interest rates, fiscal deficit, and so on. Potential GDP is the optimal production that can be attained over a longer period of time. The contrast between potential output and actual output represents the output gap, or GDP gap, and the actual GDP is what is produced. It enumerates the policies that need to be put into action to accelerate or decelerate the growth rate. Potential output cannot be used as a short-term tool for calculating output with policies such as incurring high fiscal deficit, import liberalization for consumption, reduction of interest rate to encourage consumption and investment. Its viability in the medium term is impractical. A positive gap results when the actual GDP increases and stays above potential output. It is inflational in nature, as demand exceeds supply because of an excess of funds that may again be due to fiscal excess or reduction in interest rate. 27. 833. Snippets. Sustainability is critical to decide the potential output. Sustainability is evaluated in terms of prices, fiscal deficit, current account deficit. Esports cannot be improved by devaluating the exchange rate, as it can cause dysfunction, financial sector not piling up non-performing assets, NPAs, etc. In the opposite set of conditions, if actual GDP is below potential GDP, called negative gap, the inflation will come down. Employment implications are that when the gap is positive, there will be full employment, all those eligible and looking for work find work, and in fact, productivity will also rise. Ideally, potential GDP is not to be exceeded as it produces price instability and overheating of economy. Towards this objective, the government's fiscal policy and Reserve Bank of India's RBI monetary policy are suitably used. Potential output in the long run depends on a variety of factors, such as infrastructure, human capital and skills, potential labor force, which depends on demographic factors, level of technological development and labor productivity. The limits thus relate to natural and institutional factors. We need to be clear about the following concepts: GDP, GNP, GVA, Param's Las. National income gross and net values nominal, and real values current, and constant prices GDP at market and factor cost per capita income New Delhi GDP, GNP, divided by mid-year population of the corresponding year. Per capita income is shown as an indicator of how rich or poor the country is, its standard of living and so on. But like all averages, per capita income is indicative of the prosperity of a country to a limited degree, as there can be steep inequality, which is often the case in majority of the countries. Fact check. For example, in 2020, the per capita income in India is approximately $2,000. But there are 400 millions below the poverty line, and it is made worse by the pandemic. 28,833. Sriram's Last GDP has limitations in coverage. The measurement of national income encounters many coverage issues. GDP does not capture black money, which may be generated by two means: legal activities like smuggling, and also by unreported incomes due to tax evasion. Thus, parallel economy poses a serious hurdle to accurate GDP estimates. In the rural economy, considerable portion of transactions occur as the barter economy. GDP does not cover it. Quite a large portion of the economy is in the informal sector: small and marginal farmers, landless laborers, vegetable vendors, domestic help, and so on. It is outside official GDP estimates. The national income accounts do not include the care economy, domestic work, and housekeeping. Social services are ignored. Voluntary and charitable work, as it is unpaid. GDP and data quality. GDP data does not capture the following qualitative data. Environmental costs, national income calculations are not useful to see whether the output causes pollution or not. What matters is the output and its market value. Poverty is not revealed. In a rich country, the illusion is created that everyone enjoys a high standard of living. Inequality is not indicated. Health and education standards escape calculation in the GDP figures except as a sectoral estimate. A measure of growth and not GDP is a measure of growth and not progress. GDP stipulates the quantitative growth. Qualitative growth aspects include development, progress, and well-being. As a result, GDP reveals broad national economic growth in output. Simon Kuznets, who spearheaded the idea of national income and GDP, did not discover this guideline as a measure of welfare, but only as a metric to quantify, monetize, and compare. Growth is strictly a precondition for welfare. Countries often scoring high on the measures of welfare, such as life expectancy, have a higher GDP. Nevertheless, even in developed countries, GDP does not take into account intangible attributes, such as leisure and quality of life, which is determined by multiple criteria other than economic goods like relationships, lack of stress, good mental health, quality gender relations, clean environment, culture, etc., and hence cannot be labeled as a metric of progression. Even though limitations are present in GDP evaluation, the reasons for using GDP as an economic productivity metric of progression of the economy and standard of living are that it is calculated routinely, extensively, and consistently. It can be undertaken relatively conveniently. Global comparisons are possible. 29. 834. National income statistics in India. Compilation of National Account Statistics, NAS, is the responsibility of the National Statistical Office, NSO, of the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation, MOSPI, State Directorates of Economics and Statistics DESA, are in charge of assembling their state domestic product and other aggregates at the state level. Statistics released by the NSO and the state DESAs are associated with various macroeconomic metrics of the Indian economy at current and constant prices, including consumption, saving, gross and net domestic product, public sector transactions, capital formation, per capita income, etc. The NSO is responsible for releasing annual and quarterly GDP estimates. In the new National Income Series, since 2015, the data correlate with GVA2. As a general rule, when the base year of national account statistics is modified, some changes occur in the levels of GDP estimates due to the expansion of coverage as new commodities manufactured in the economy are considered. Part of informal economy becomes formal as the organizations grow, and also because sophisticated methods of data collection come into action. The CSO is responsible for revising the base year of the NAS series periodically. Advance estimates, AE, of national income, known as the first estimates of growth for the current year, are released before the fiscal year is over, in January, so that the budget statistics can be estimated rationally for the forthcoming fiscal year. The advance estimates undergo subsequent revision and are released as quick estimates of NAS after completion of the full fiscal year, but they are still not completely validated. Quick estimates undergo further revision to provisional estimates, and the last figures to be presented are the final estimates. The improvisation is based on the availability of data in a specific course of time. Final estimates arrive a few years after the quick estimates. GDP estimates take a number of years to become nearly final. Many revisions take place before the estimates are finalized. The need for so many rounds is self-evident, as we shall see. Early in January every year, MOSPI releases the first advance estimates so that there are working numbers for the union budget to be finalized. By the February end, with the help of the Q3 data, advance estimates are released. When the fiscal year is over, by May end provisional estimates are released by when the Q4 data becomes available. By the end January of the next calendar, MOSPI will release the first revised estimates to be followed by the second revised estimates by Jan end the next calendar, and the third revised estimates by Jan end of the next fiscal year. As more data is available with time, revisions become more accurate and earlier numbers are revised up or down. Fact check: the first official guidelines of national income were drafted by the Central Statistical Office, CSO, where the base year was set as 1948 to 49. In 1956, these estimates were published. Ever since, the base years changed continuously as Indian economy grew manifold to manufacture new goods and services. CSO changed the base year to 2011 to 12 in 2015. 30. 834. Sriram's Las. New Institutional Framework for National Statistics 2019. National Statistical Office, NSO. MOSPI, Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation amalgamated the Central Statistics Office, CSO, and the National Sample Survey Office, NSSO, into National Statistical Office, NSO, to bring in more synergy. The Chief Statistician of India, CSI, heads the NSO. The CSO evaluates macroeconomic data, such as economic, GDP, growth data, inflation, and industrial production. The NSSO is responsible for conducting large-scale surveys and brings out reports on health, education, household expenditure, and other social and economic indicators. The NSC's directive is to release policies, standards, and priorities in statistical matters. The NSC constitutes of 4 members and a chairperson, each with specialization and experience in specified statistical fields. Public policy requires genuine data for its formulation and effectiveness, be it census or other data: prices, growth, exports, employment, human development, gender parity, etc. All require standard data. Snippets. National Statistical Commission, NSC, supervises statistical works in India. On the recommendations of the Rangarajan Commission, the government had set up the NSC in 2006, which reviewed the Indian statistical system. New GDP Series 2015. Delby. The Central Statistics Office, CSO, released a new series of national accounts with 2011 to 12 as base year for calculating the extent of the economy and economic growth rate. It maximizes the coverage across segments, including farm, corporate, and unorganized. In new series, the data for corporate income is collected from the Corporate Affairs Ministry's MCA 21 inventory, an extensive anthology that allows the collection of granular information, even at a small firm level. Earlier, such data were withdrawn primarily from the Reserve Bank of India's study on companies and finances. Fact check. On the basis of new data available by 2015, it came to be known that the 2004 to 2005 GDP data was underestimating industrial growth, as the coverage was low and the weights were misallocated. Under the new GDP series, the share of manufacturing increased to 15.8% from 11.9% in 2004 to 2005. The share of agriculture has increased marginally in the new series to 17.2% from 16.8%. GDP back series. The new GDP series was announced in 2015, with 2011 to 12 as the base year. GOI announced new GDP data from 2012 to 13 onwards. Since then, all GDP data, whether quarterly or annual, have been based on the new series. This new series is 31. 835. Globally more comparable, as it takes into account a far greater representation of the Indian economy and is more reflective of the real state of the Indian economy. It is the usual practice of governments that whenever a new national income series is introduced from a particular year, experts work on applying the same methodology to find out the output values for the years preceding the new base year. It helps in understanding the economy, its size, growth rate, and so on, more accurately. It is called the back series. If data is not available, splicing method is used. Splicing method. In an index number, be it growth or price index, it may become necessary at certain times to make provisions for the appearance of new items or the deletion of items previously in use. For instance, in price index numbers, when new commodities enter the market or old commodities go off the market. The method of effecting the change is known as splicing. Essentially, these are inclusions and exclusions as adjustments for comparability. It has been applied for preparing the estimates partially in agriculture, trade, repair, hotels and restaurants, real estate, ownership of dwelling and professional services, public administration and defense and other services. System of National Accounts 2008 SNA. The aim of SNA is to provide a complete system of accounts, enabling international comparisons of all significant economic activity. The suggestion is that individual countries use SNA as a guide for constructing their own national accounting systems to promote international comparability. However, adherence to an international standard is entirely voluntary and cannot be rigidly enforced. India follows them. Snippets. The System of National Accounts 2008 SNA is the latest version of the International Statistical Standard for the National Accounts, adopted by the United Nations Statistical Commission, the UNSC. Indian economy, sectors and their components. CSO in India divides the three sectors of the economy with their respective components in the following way. 1. Agriculture, forestry and fishing sector, crops, livestock, forestry and logging, fishing and aquaculture. 2. Industry sector, mining and quarrying, manufacturing food products, beverages and tobacco, textiles, apparel and leather products, petrol products, machinery and equipment, other manufactured goods, electricity, gas, water supply and other utility services, construction. 32. 836. Sriram has 3. Services sector, trade, repair, hotels and restaurants, trade and repair services. Hotels and restaurants, transport, storage, communication and services related to broadcasting, railways, road transport, water transport, air transport, services incidental to transport, storage, financial, real estate and professional services, real estate, ownership of dwelling and professional services community, social and personal services, public administration and defense, other services. Notice that mining and quarrying are in the secondary sector as per PIB, 2011 to 12 prices, in 2020 to 21, the contribution industry and services sector are 20%, 26%, and 54%, respectively. Contribution of agriculture and allied, the relatively high contribution of agriculture and allied activities is an unusual aspect in 2020 to 21. The share of agriculture in gross domestic product, GDP, reached almost 20% for the first time in the last 17 years, making it the only bright spot in GDP performance during 2020 to 21, according to the Economic Survey 2020 to 2021. The resilience of the farming community in the face of adversities made agriculture the only sector to have clocked a positive growth of 3.4% at constant prices in 2020 to 21, when other sectors plunged. The share of agriculture in GDP increased to 19.9% in 2020 to 21 from 17.8% in 2019 to 20. The last time the contribution of the agriculture sector in GDP was at 20% was in 2003 to 2004. Change in the economy. LA structural change in the economy. Structural changes occur when the contributions of the three main sectors of the economy change due to modernization and technological developments. In the earlier stages, agriculture dominated, then industry took over, and even later, the services sector became the principal portion of the economy as it progressed. The structural change explained above is the first and principal view. Although, structural change might also suggest that a subsistence economy alters into a commercial economy, or that a regulated economy liberalizes. An insulated and protectionist economy transforms into open and globalized. Since 1991, India has been structurally reorienting its economy, under which there's more room for markets. The public sector is exposed to domestic and global competition, and there's an increased flow of foreign investment and foreign goods, etc. Formal and informal sectors of economy. Economic production can either be formal or informal. A formal sector is registered with the government, and they come under government jurisdiction, for example, Factories Act and Shops and Establishments Act. The informal sector is unregistered and does not come under direct scrutiny of the government. It includes domestic help, street vendors, landless laborers, small and marginal farmers, etc., and is sizable. Generally, formal and organized sectors are taken to mean the same. The formal sector units have 10 employees or more if using electricity, or 20 or more without. 33. 836. Sriram Las. Electricity. All large organizations come under the formal sector. Also known as the organized sector, it is necessary for them to register and report to the government. Such employees have varied benefits in the form of limited working hours, holidays, insurance, etc. Informal economy. The informal sector includes unincorporated enterprises not constituted as separate legal entities independently of their owners. For example, proprietorships and partnerships. They are owned by individual household members or several members of the same or different households typically. They operate at a low level of organization, on a small scale, and with little or no division between labor and capital as factors of production. The informal sector is largely characterized by skills gained outside of a formal education, easy entry. Anyone who wishes to join the sector can find some sort of Work which will result in cash earnings, a lack of stable employer-employee relationships, and a small scale of operations. Workers who participate in the informal economy are classified as employed. The type of work that makes up the informal economy is diverse, particularly in terms of capital invested, technology used, and income generated. It ranges from self-employment or unpaid family labor to domestic help to street vendors, etc. On the higher end of the spectrum are upper-tier informal activities such as small-scale service or manufacturing businesses, which have more limited entry and higher establishment costs. Most workers in the informal sector, even those are self-employed or wage workers, do not have access to secure work, benefits, welfare protection, or representation. These features differ from businesses and employees in the formal sector, which have regular hours of operation, a regular location, and other structured benefits. Causes of informality include informal sector is a reservoir of potentially productive entrepreneurs who are kept out of formality by high regulatory costs, and informality is a survival strategy for low-skill individuals who are unproductive to become formal. Many workers engage in informal ventures by choice, for either economic or non-economic reasons. Economic motivations include the ability to evade taxes, the freedom to circumvent regulations and licensing requirements, and the capacity to maintain certain government benefits. Hence, a necessity to formalize the economy is of paramount importance, for which the government has taken multiple steps such as demonetization, GST, Jan Dan, Digital India, and incentives. Once an informal unit transforms into a formalized setup, it is deemed eligible for bank loans at concessional rates and can modernize the operations and scale up. Formulation of public policy becomes even more accurate with genuine data, for which formalization is necessary. Even otherwise, formalization is unavoidable with the growth of an economy. 34. 836. M. Sriram's has economic growth, cyclical and structural. We need to know what a business cycle is in order to comprehend the difference between the two. A business cycle denotes the periods of expansion or recession. During the expansion period, the economy manufactures more goods and services. Productivity metrics like industrial production, employment, sales, and personal incomes are rising. The same metrics are negative during recession, which means that an economy is contracting. Structural growth is channeled by factors in the long term, such demographic supremacy, with the youth driving the economy, and suitable as macroeconomic policies improving growth. In 2019 to 20 and 2020 to 21, investment was in depreciation, as there were excess capacities built up, and were yet to be sold due to the delay in growth initially in the pre-pandemic time, during pandemic, and the recession. Structural decline or negative growth also exists for a different set of reasons, such as an aging population, and so on. Cyclical growth is short-term due to build-up of surplus capacity, or commodity prices going up or down, interest rates undergoing changes, etc. The fall in the economic growth rates, 2020, brought on by the pandemic might be structural as many enterprises have closed down, employment has suffered steeply, and deaths have resulted in families losing savings, etc. Economic slowdown in India, if cyclical, can be because of the following factors: inflation, bad weather, new daily currency volatility, high oil prices, global upheavals. The structural slump caused by the pandemic has damaged domestic savings, affected employment, private consumption, and investment. The consumption fall in Indian economy can be attributed to the following factors: plummeting incomes, tumbling savings. Bank loans for commercial purposes is on a decline, low consumer confidence, and hence the spending is dented, and low business confidence, as corporates have considerable overcapacities. The following remedial measures can be put into place: supply-side policies, like direct tax cuts, step up public investment, liberalize FDI norms, monetary easing with rate cuts, and DBTS. 35.837. Fact check: more than 55 to 60% of GDP is attributed to private consumption in India, usually followed by funding for capital formation, which is accompanied by net exports, and finally by government expenditure. But it is not always the same. Structural reforms 2020 to 21. Some structural reforms that can put India on a long-lasting path of long-term growth are: in agriculture, Farmers Produce Trade and Commerce Promotion and Facilitation Act 2020. Farmers Empowerment and Protection Agreement of Price Assurance and Farm Services Act 2020. Essential Commodities Amendment Act 2020. MSMES. New MSME defining criteria encompassing almost 99% of all firms and enabling MSMEs to grow and create jobs. Validation of 4 labor codes: Wage Code, Industrial Relations Code 2020, Code on Occupational Safety, Health and Working Conditions Code 2020, and Social Security Code 2020. AMI's IAS PSU categorization in only strategic sectors. Privatization of PSUs. Privatization of PSUs in non-strategic sectors. Production-linked incentive (PLI) scheme. Space, equal opportunities provided to private companies in developing satellites, launching them, and other space-based services. Permissive geospatial data policy for offering remote sensing data to technology. Entrepreneurs. Defense, corporatization of Ordnance Factory Board. Defense manufacturing FDI limit under the aegis of automatic route will be increased from 49% to 74%. 36.